Hey, it's Scott Petrak with another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. Well, this got ugly in a hurry. The Browns were blown out in Baltimore, prompting questions about a quarterback change and the future of many of the most visible people in the organization. The Browns can't score or bat on special teams and keep putting the defense in terrible spots. They're 0-2 and searching for answers with the visit from the powerful Packers up next. The potential for even more ugliness is high. Here to discuss, as always, is Dave Chudowsky of Go, the WKYC Morning News. What's going on, Chud?
Well, I won my fantasy game. Can we just start with that? I'm 1-1 now.
Sure,
So
nobody cares, but that's good, buddy.
that's right.
There
That's right. I know. I know. I care. I
you go.
care. Nothing can bring me down. No, the Browns do. Yeah, I figured I'd start with the one football thing that makes me happy, but
Right.
the Browns do not. And Scott, I'm just I don't know. I guess I have to question myself. Do we have to question ourselves? Because the first half, it went the way I thought it could possibly go. We both predicted kind of. I I thought the line was too high.
Hmm.
I thought that the Browns would cover and they would lose, and it would be a closer game. And you and I agreed on that. And in the first half, I thought, all right, we're on to something here. And then you have the punt block, and it's always something. It's one play,
Yeah.
whether it's a turnover, a block punt, it's something that turns the tide, and then it spirals and they can't recover. And that's the case. And then I sit here and I watch the second half, and then I wonder, man, have we been giving these guys too much credit
Uh,
that they won't be as bad as everyone else thinks?
yeah, it's interesting, Chud. I mean, the way it finished was terrible. Embarrassing. Miles Garrett says, the bleep's embarrassing. Joe Flacco used the word embarrassed a couple of times. It's rough when that happens in week two. And the way it ended is embarrassing and it's ugly and 41-17, and that included a Browns garbage time touchdown. That's bad. You get routed in this league. It doesn't need to happen. It shouldn't happen. You're right about they were hanging in. Like the defense didn't give up a touchdown in the first half until after that black punt. So it could have been 3-3 at halftime. And then we look at things differently and you can approach the second half differently. And then you have, the turnovers get away from Flacco in the second half. And we'll talk about that. But I guess my overriding thought is the margin for error for this team is so small that it
Yep.
can't afford things to go wrong. And block punts and missed field goals and drop passes, like those are easily avoidable things that have doomed the Browns through two games. And they can't overcome those, especially when they have an offense that can't score. So you're 100% right. Once you see something like that, like other teams had that stuff. I think Tampa Bay had a pump block last night. They came back and won the game because they can move the ball at the end and they can score and blah, blah, blah. So the Browns just are not set up to do that right now. And it makes life so difficult for them and for the people watching, right? But that's where they are. And when you have no explosion on offense, your receivers can't get open, you can't protect your quarterback, then you can only win one way. And that one way is with great defense and you don't hurt yourself for special teams. Ideally, you would help yourself for special teams, and that's not happening. And then you figure out a way to score some points on offense. And right now they're not doing any of those things except playing really good defense. And I know Miles Garrett said all the right things at the end, and so did the other guys that hey, they need to last longer. And they played good against the run, but they gave up the passes late, and that's true. But they were put in such bad spots that it's really hard to ask a lot more from the defense, in my opinion.
Yeah, and before the Bengals game, I can't remember if I said this with you. I think I did, but I definitely did on Channel 3 in the morning show when I did my preview piece. I called the Bengals game a must win.
Yeah.
And I think I did it here. And Scott, I stick by that because you'd be 1-1 right now if they would have pulled off that game. And, what we always see happen, and what my point was, is 0-1 turns into 0-2. Now you're probably going to be 0-3 unless you pull off a miracle against what looks to be one of the best teams in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And then 0-3 could turn to 0-4. And with this schedule, who knows what it could turn into? that's why I thought that first game was a must win. And now I just, I wonder, should we really be surprised at what we're seeing?
Yeah, well, it's so much about perception. We talk about it a lot on here, Chud. You're 100% right about that. And we talked about it last week that I thought that made the loss to the Bengals and the way they lost to the Bengals so much worse because we knew what was coming up. And for them to, like, how we would be viewing this so differently if the Browns had won that game. They'd be 1-1. And even if they lost 41-17 against Baltimore, it'd still be, yeah, well, that's a tough game. It's in Baltimore. They'd be 1-1. They'd be tied for the AFC North because they would have beat Cincinnati. Joe Burrow's not out now, out for whoever knows, who knows how long. The Steelers are flawed, and then you get the Ravens. So you just look at even the AFC North completely different at 1-1. And you'd feel better. There's some room for losses. You're not chasing that first win. All those things are 100% right, Chud, because they couldn't make a kick, because they couldn't catch passes against Cincinnati. And because you have that bad taste and the loss, and then what happens in week 2 in Baltimore, it just kind of snowballs. And because the Browns don't have a big reservoir of success to satiate the fans and for people to draw on, the negativity creeps in so fast. And that's especially true when the outside expectations were so low going into the season, whether that's the odds makers or the fans. So when what seems like reality meets and matches what the preconceived notions were, then all of a sudden things just start to go downhill and they snowball, and you start talking about, oh, is it going to turn into 0-6? And when's the next win going to come from? And then it's big picture stuff like, do you change your quarterback? What's the future of, the veterans? Do they have a fire sale at the trade deadline? Are Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry safe? Like, these are the kind of conversations that were always in the back of your head, but for them to be bubbling up after week 2, it's a terrible sign, right? I don't think we should be there yet, but I understand how some people are there.
You just brought up 3 points that I was going to bring up. The conversation is there, so let's hit them. Now, you know what? Before we hit, because you just said 3 things that I want to hit, but before we hit those things, let's put the special teams thing away, okay? Because we have a problem there. We have a big problem with special teams. It's why they're 0-2. Do we have a Bubba Ventrone problem? What is going on there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I got asked this on the radio yesterday, Chud, and I was also asked if Kevin Stefanski was the main guy to blame for the team, and I said I didn't think so, and we can get to that if we want later. But so when Bubba, I'm like, well, then can I blame Bubba for all the special teams mistakes? And I think Bubba's a good coach. I think he's crazy intense. I liked him as a player. He's a really good special teamer. But at some point, you do have to look at the coach when special teams are having these issues. Now, I don't blame Bubba for kicking issues. Right? He's given a kicker. They work with him. He's not a kicking expert. Kicking feels separate. But when you struggle to cover, and they struggled, they gave up a big punt return the other day, and part of that's on the punter. It was a low kick by Corey Bojorquez, which makes it harder to cover, and they had the same thing happen against Cincinnati. But it's Bubba's unit, the coverage unit. And then you have the egregious error of giving up a block punt. And Ronnie Hickman just got run over. So we could argue if that's a Bubba problem or not, because the personal protector just needs to be stronger. But maybe it's the wrong personal protector. And he got yanked. Ronnie Hickman got yanked after that happened. The Ravens guy said earlier in the game, he said, hey, if I can be one-on-one with that guy, I'm going to win. Is that something Bubba should have noticed? And this isn't just these 2 weeks. They've had the same issues. They've been unable to have any kind of big plays in the return game. There's no kind of trick plays that help out the offense, right? They're not giving the offense great field position from blocking a kick or running a trick play or having a big return. And part of that, Bubba has been hurt by injuries. Jakeem Grant got hurt and never played. Naheem Hines got hurt and never played. Now DeAndre Carter last week goes out with a concussion. But, his backup, Isaiah Bond, struggled to catch the ball last week. And the ball's bouncing, and that's hurting field position. So when you put all of it together, I don't know if I want to go as far as to say it's a Bubba Ventrone problem, but they have a special teams problem, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Yes, they do. All right. Let's move on to the quarterback now. And Joe Flacco, you kind of alluded to it. It's already being talked about. And you saw Gabriel come in garbage time, whatnot. Stefanski said, Scott, yesterday, right, that he's not making the change.
Yep.
Joe Flacco's still the quarterback for this week. What are your thoughts there? I mean, how long is the leash for Flacco?
Yeah.
Do you think that they should be considering making a move, or do you just stay the course with Flacco?
Yeah, I think you stay the course. And I say that for a couple reasons. Number one, and Joe Bitonio said it after the game, on the list of Browns problems, Joe Flacco is not near the top of the list. And I agree with that. Was he great the other day? No. Was he good? No. Does his lack of mobility hurt the team when the pass protection isn't good enough? Sure. If you had Lamar Jackson and able to run around and create plays, that's different. But we already knew that about Joe. It was a bad interception, and that was at a key point in the game. The Browns are still hanging around, and he throws a bad interception, and you could see it coming. In the press box, I had the angle. I was like, "Oh, Joe should not." You could see Njoku trying to start in a break, and I was like, "Oh, Joe's going to throw it." It was just a bad decision. The safety comes over. He should have run it. Having said all that, the protection's a bigger problem. The receivers not getting open, not catching the ball, not staying on their feet. Cedric Tillman kept falling down, and it made it really hard to complete passes to him. Those are bigger problems. The run game was better this week with Quinshawn Judkins. Week one, that was a bigger problem, Joe Flacco. So I don't think he's the problem, the biggest problem. I think he gives you the best chance to win, which still matters to me in week 3, right? This is not a lost season yet. I don't think you can do that to the rest of the team. I don't think you can have your plan that he's the guy and abandon that in 2 weeks when it's not his fault. And the 2 interceptions in the opener that he gets credited for weren't his fault. They weren't the best passes, but they go off the receiver's hands, turn it into interceptions. I don't blame Joe for week 1. You can blame Joe for part of week 2. So if he still gives you the best chance to win, I stick with him. And then even if you disagree with all that, it's the wrong time to go to Dillon Gabriel. They're playing the Packers, who might have the best defense in the league or one of the best defenses in the league. Your offense is not in any kind of sync or rhythm. So if you're going to go to a rookie, give him a better spot than where the Browns' offense is right now. So I just don't think it's the right time. If they're 0-5 or 0-6 or whatever that number is, Chug, 1-7, and then, yes, we can talk about how it makes sense and you want to see the future, and then we can talk about if it should be Dillon Gabriel or Shadur Sanders. But right now, I think it doesn't make any sense to go away from Joe Flacco.
Yeah, I agree. You got to go with Flacco this week, but I will say the leash is a little shorter. And like you said, I mean, when the losses, if they pile up, you got to start looking at another direction, I think. But yeah, now is not the time. And also, I think we're also going to debate as this year goes on how they handled the quarterback situation with reps and training camp and with the 4 guys and instead of really concentrating on 1 or 2 guys. I don't know. Do you think that's something we'll be hitting a lot this year?
Maybe. I think it's part of the reason maybe the chemistry isn't there between Joe and some of the receivers. Right now, I think that's an issue. If they eventually make a move, can we talk about, hey, did Dillon Gabriel get enough reps? Now, they really gave Dillon Gabriel a decent amount of reps for a guy that wasn't going to be the starter.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I think right now it's not as ideal as if like Jalen Hurts getting all the reps or Joe Burrow getting all the reps. But there was a reason for that, so I'm kind of torn on that one.
Can this offensive line get things turned around?
Well, it needs to, Chud. It would help to get Jack Conklin back, and now we don't know. Kevin Stefanski said he hopes it's not long term. He said they're going to, day by day with all the injuries this week. So you know, they could use him when he's healthy and playing. He's really good. So it's a fall off even when when you go to a guy like Cornelius Lucas. And then they got to figure out DeJuan Jones. I've just started to rewatch the game, but it looked like he struggled. And then they don't play him the whole game. And they said that because they were managing him due to the heat, they were worried about him. That's just weird. And I get it. He's like the biggest guy and he's 370 pounds and it was hot and you want to be careful. And we know Denzel Ward missed time with cramps and we can talk about that. But like it's just weird. None of the other linemen need to be subbed, but DeJuan Jones does. And then they're going to go play Micah Parsons in the Packers this week. So I think the three inside guys are fine. Posick, Bitonio, and Teller. Now, Posick was slow on one screen getting out, and it looked like it was set up, and Kyle Hamilton makes a good play. But, I'm not saying those guys can't be better, but the issues are at tackle. Compton back will help, and then DeJuan Jones needs to play better and prove that he's the right guy at left tackle, and I think he's far from having proved that to this point.
Scott, to me, Jerry Jeudy would be a great number 2 wide receiver in the NFL. I just don't know if he is a great number 1. And I don't know. I need to be sold that he's a number 1 receiver.
I think that's fair, Chud. I really do. And he is not off, to the best start. Multiple drops. I thought it was multiple drops both games. He pushed back when a receiver said he had one on, I think he was just referring to Sunday. And it was a third down. It was a blitz. His guy blitzes. It's a hot route. Sound like wedding crashers. Turns around, doesn't catch it, and they punt where it would have been like 4th and 2 from the 32. So they might have gone for it, or they try to kick a long field goal. Anyway, it's potentially points off the board. And then there was a play on the sideline where he juggled it, and then he thought he got both feet in bounds still. The officials called him out of bounds. So to me, that counts as a drop because it's an incompletion. And, I think he still gets open consistently. I don't think he's the biggest problem at receiver, but I completely hear your point that maybe he's not a number 1, and I will give you that. But my problem with the receiving core, Chud, is Cedric Tillman. I know he's got 2 touchdowns. He also has big drops. I mentioned he couldn't stay on his feet against Baltimore. Part of that, he was blaming contact and thought there should have been flags. One, he just slipped, and Flacco threw it to him, and it bounces off him as he's falling. Another one, he gets pushed down. Flacco was going to throw it to him, sees him fall, and then has to take a sack. He needs to be bigger and stronger and more physical and catch the ball because he had a huge drop at the end of the Bengals game. Jamari Thrash hasn't shown up, and Isaiah Bond hasn't shown up. So you're putting a lot on Jerry Jeudy's plate, and he hasn't been good enough, but he's getting no help at that receiver position.
All right, Scott, you had mentioned Stefanski, and I heard you on the radio yesterday. Great job as always. And they asked you about Stefanski, and there's other, talk around town of him being in trouble. Do you blame him for what's going on? Do you think he's on the hot seat?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of those betting sites also has him pretty high on the list of, first coach to be fired. I don't think it's there, Chud. First of all, I think ownership wants to keep Kevin Stefanski and wants to keep Andrew Berry. And we talked about this before the season. The reality could change that. If they go 3-14 again, or 2-15, or 4-13, I don't know where the number switches, but if you follow 3-14 with another 3-14 season, it's really hard to bring back the people in charge. It just is. Doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but it is. It's difficult. It's a hard sell to the fan base. So I think there's certainly potential that we have big organizational upheaval at the end of the year. I do think 2 weeks is early for that. I don't think they're anywhere close to doing that. I don't think he's going to be one of the first coach or the first coach fired this year. Now, if they're 0-8 at the bye, does that change? Who knows, right? Like anything would be on the table. I just think it's way premature to go there. Now, the blame Kevin Stefanski is a legitimate discussion to have. And I understand that the buck stops with the head coach, and he's the play caller, and it's his offense. So when they can't score more than 17 points, which they haven't done since December 2nd, when they lost in Denver on that Monday night, I get that people want to point fingers at Stefanski, and I'm not saying they don't have any right to do that, and I'm not saying he doesn't deserve any of the blame or the responsibility. I just think he does not have a lot to work with. He's got a 40-year-old quarterback. We talked about the receiving core. We talked about the line issues. He didn't have a starting running back for week 1, and his starting running back was only there for part of week 2. His kicker missed kicks in week 1. I think there's a lot of stuff going against Kevin Stefanski, and we've seen when he has good quarterback play, or even decent quarterback play, what he can do, and he can take your team to the playoffs. So I still think he's smart. I still think, he puts the team in good positions and good positions offensively. Now, does he need to figure out a way offensively for this team to be more explosive? There's no doubt about it. Does he need to find a way to try to get these receivers who are limited talent-wise open? Yes, and I think he's trying to do all those things. I just think he's been given a really bad hand. So that's where I feel about Stefanski. He is not at the top of my list of people to blame.
Night Football doing what he does and what he did last year. And, Scott, we all know that we thought that marriage had to end, but when you look back at it, maybe it was really just that injury that held him back, and, him playing hurt and just the way that ended, man, it makes you wonder if we wish that marriage could have found a way to stay together.
Yeah, I didn't. Obviously, you're talking about Baker there, Chud. I didn't hear you say Baker. Yeah, and you watch him on Monday night, and you watch him lead that comeback, and of course, that's what goes through your mind. It has to. And would they want Baker Mayfield back right now? Yeah, of course they would. Do they want a quarterback like that? Yeah, that's what they're looking for. Now, at the time, I agreed that Baker was not a Super Bowl winning quarterback, and he's not shown that he is. Now, could he be?
Yeah.
Yes. It wouldn't. I still wouldn't put him in my top 5, 6 quarterbacks, whatever it is. But could he win a Super Bowl? Yeah, I'm not saying he can't. But at the time, I certainly didn't think he was. They were trying to make an upgrade. I thought it was the wrong guy that they were trying to make an upgrade with. I was clear about that. But there were other issues with Baker. He and Kevin Stefanski had conflict, and I felt like that was mostly on Baker's side. They would have had to work through that. I thought Baker was immature, and he's talked about maturing since he left Cleveland and what he had to go through. The trade to Carolina. Then he winds up in L.A. Then he gets a prove-it deal in Tampa and has to compete for the starting job. So it's not the same Baker Mayfield that was here from a personal standpoint, but you still see on the field the ability to make plays with his feet, which, he's not the best athlete. Troy Aikman kept saying that, but he can make something happen. He gets the ball out of his hands in a hurry. He's got a big arm. The size still bothers me to some degree. But yet you see the traits that made him the number 1 pick in the draft, and I just think they're more obvious and more consistent in Tampa than they were in Cleveland. But when you contrast that with what the Browns have going and no, apparently, long-term answer right now, then, yeah, it's people longing for Baker Mayfield makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, it's seeing the test results before you get the test, right. I guess. I'm glad you brought all that up. You make great points about all the other stops he had to make and everything. So, that's for anyone that complains, I'm just going to copy and paste what you just said there. Well, seriously, that's good analysis there on that. No question. How about the defense? Obviously, the first half was great. There was times where you're just like, man. But then in the second half, not so great, and not all on them. And, obviously a touchdown, Baltimore's defense scored. So not all the points are put on the Browns defense. But still, they gave up a lot of passing touchdowns. And all in all, just I guess how do you feel about them?
Yeah, I still feel great about him.
Yeah.
Well, here's the caveat. If Denzel Ward's on the field, I feel great about him.
Yeah.
Because Ward, and I'm looking forward to talking to Denzel about this, because he missed almost all the game with cramping. and he tried to come back in the second half, played a couple snaps, and couldn't do it. Couldn't continue to play. And that left them with Cam Mitchell out at playing wide. And I feel like I know he's played most of his career in the slot, but Miles Harden beat him out for that slot position. Plus, he's bigger than Miles. He's not huge, but he's bigger than Miles Harden. So they went with Cam Mitchell on the outside, and he gave up 3 of the touchdowns. So if Denzel Ward's out there, I don't think that happens. And it's a tough spot for Mitchell to be in. He's never played that much outside before. Lamar Jackson extends plays, so you got to cover longer. Lamar Jackson puts the ball in the money, so it feels like every time you get beat, it turns into a touchdown because it's a good throw. So, he's in a tough spot. He didn't play well, but it's different if Denzel Ward's out there. Like, I think even if, everything else is the same. The block punt, the Joe Flacco interception, return to the 5, all of it. I don't think the defense gives up nearly as many points if Denzel Ward is out there. And it just shows you how important he is, how they lack quality depth at corner, and that's because Martin Emerson Jr. blew out his Achilles in training camp, so they just can't afford to lose Ward or Newsome. And, Lamar Jackson exacerbates that. I think Jim Schwartz still tries to play that man coverage, and it puts these corners in a difficult spot, but that's his system. If you knew you weren't going to add Denzel Ward, maybe you change the plan going in. So I feel good about this defense. It was a terrible time for Denzel Ward to get these cramps, and it's just weird, Chud, because guys usually don't miss that much time with cramps.
Yeah, it's funny when you're talking about Stefanski. It made me think, well, man, this falls more on Andrew Berry. Then I watched some of these rookies. Fannon's looking good. Junkins didn't look bad. Definitely there's some promise here with some of these rookies.
There is. Dylan Sampson looked good week 1. Didn't do a ton, week 2. Mason Graham, I thought, showed up week 2, tackle for loss. Carson Schlesinger looks like he's the real deal. Then you get the quarterbacks, and we don't know about them. But, so I think this rookie class does have a chance to be really good. He needs it to save himself and to save his draft picks, because his draft history has not been good. Jedrick Wills was a miss. Grant Delpit's, I don't think the player they thought he would be yet. He's on the team. He's still, he's playing. He's a contributor. He's a starter, all those things. But, has he lived up to the number 2 pick and the contract? No. We can go down the list. So I think overall his draft classes have not been great, and he was hurt by the not having 3 number 1 picks in a row with the Deshaun Watson trade. But this draft class has a chance to save him that way. I think if you go big picture, there's tons of pluses and minuses when you look at the overall roster construction and roster moves from Barry.
All right, Scott, I'm getting a little bit sick to my stomach talking about last week. So I think we've really dissected it enough. Let's just move on, and let's become even more sick when I ask you, how in the heck do you beat the Green Bay Packers right now? Your pick to go to the Super Bowl, and man, their defense looks incredible. Their offense is doing what I had hoped it would do last year from a fantasy football standpoint. They just look really polished. How do you beat them? And I haven't looked. I saw it was 8. I've seen 9. I've seen 8.5. I mean, that's a pretty big spread on your home field to be down as an underdog.
It is. I'm a little surprised it's not bigger. I was surprised the Ravens was 12.5, and I'm surprised the Packers isn't bigger than 8.5 or 9. It's going to be really, really difficult, Judd. I think, not to be cliche, you need to turn them over. And the Browns have lost the turnover battle. I forget what the stat is, but it's a bunch of games in a row. And they've lost at both games this year, and that has to change. Like, if you're less talented than the team you're facing, that's what you need to go your way. And the Browns haven't been able to do that, and then they're just compounding their mistakes. So you got to figure out a way to turn over the Packers. Tip a pass. Myles Garrett has to come around the corner and strip Jordan Love. Something. And the Browns had a couple chances. Cameron Mitchell punched the ball loose of Derrick Henry, and I think it was after the block punt. And the ball came loose, and the Ravens guy dives on it. Devin Bush had a ball in his hands for an interception and doesn't catch it. Like those plays, those things happen, but those are the plays the Browns need to make every week, but especially against the Packers if they're going to have a chance. I think they need to get it out to a good start because you need to hang around. You can't let Green Bay know you're passing 40 times because the pass rush is too good. Micah Parsons is too good. So you got to run it. You got to turn them off or turn them over, and you have to play the same kind of defense they've been playing. And it's going to be a challenge. Jordan Love's good. You know, they have Josh Jacobs, carries the ball a bunch for him. And he's a good running back. They got tight ends. They got guys on the outside. So it's going to be a real challenge. But the defense needs to play like it has been. It needs to get a good pass rush and force Jordan Love into some mistakes for the Browns to have any kind of chance.
I think if it was in Green Bay, it'd probably be a 13.5 line.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I bet. It's crazy too how the Browns have outgained, right? I mean, haven't the Browns really outgained their opponent in the 2 games so far?
Yeah, I mean, they're number 1 in the league defensively in yards per game given up. You know, I think they barely outgained the Ravens, but they did, and the Ravens had like 240 something. You know, Lamar had 4 touchdowns, but the Browns are great against the run, and it speaks to field position that the Ravens had. So, yeah, I mean, you know, if you do that and then hold them to field goals, hold the Packers to field goals, or get off the field with turnovers, you know, and score, you know, if you score, that helps, right? So all those things need to happen. And, you know, we talked about Joe Flacco, and we've talked about this blueprint for success. But I thought it was interesting to hear Flacco say it again after the game Sunday, Chud. We said the defense is playing so well that it reminded him of some of his early years in Baltimore. Where he said the offense in Baltimore at that time wasn't very good, but it made enough plays, and it wasn't even making enough plays. It didn't make key mistakes that allowed the defense to carry the team. And he said, as the Browns offense tries to figure it out and tries to take the next step to where it's, you know, really good football and they can move the ball up and down the field and score a bunch of points. He goes, until we're there, and he goes, we're not there, and, you know, part of it's youth and part of it's whatever. I was just saying a new system, but it's not a new system. You know, it's youth and guys coming together and developing chemistry with receivers. Until that happens, you need to play clean, fundamental football. And if you do that offensively, then that gives your defense a chance to win games for you. And I think, you know, special teams plays into that, you know, like the complementary football you always hear. But I thought for Flacco to say that was interesting because he knows they're not where they need to be, but that doesn't mean they can't still win games. So when you ask for the blueprint, that's the blueprint. Play great defense. Your offense doesn't commit mistakes and scores just enough, right? So, you know, that means Flacco can't turn the ball over. It means, you know, you can't have fumbles. It means you can't have bad penalties to take you out of field goal range. You can't have drops that cost you points. All those things, like if they play, you know, a near perfect game, at least it gives them a chance. You know, is that chance to win a game 2017 or 17-16? Like, I don't know exactly how that looks because we haven't seen that explosiveness. But, you know, we saw them score 16 against the Bengals. It could have been 20 with made kicks. Like, that's the kind of game you're talking about where you can see them get there as long as the defense continues to play at a really high level.
Mm-hmm. All right, prediction time. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, we're 1-1 after bouncing back. We weren't really close with the score, but we get the win. In Predictionville, we're both 1-1 now. I'll go first. I'm not going to waste a lot of time. I mean, obviously, anything can happen in the NFL. The Browns could pull off the shocker, but I'm not going to predict it. I'm going to go 27-13. I'm not exactly quite sure how they get the 13, but they do. And you know, maybe it's a close game and it gets away in the third or fourth quarter. But I'll go Packers 27, Browns 13.
Yeah, I'm right around there, Chud. You know, I think the Packers are just too good. The Browns have too many question marks. We've already touched on everything that's going wrong. even if they play better, which, I think there is a really good chance the Browns play better. Just they don't make as many mistakes. They clean some stuff up. You get better as the season goes along, is the goal at least. Even if that happens, I think there's still too big of a gap between the Packers and the Browns. The Packers have a long, they're rested. They played on Thursday night. So I'm going to go, I think the defense still plays well. I'm going to go Packers 24. And I was going to see if I was going to switch up my number, but I'm not. I'm going to go 24-13, Judd. So I know we got Browns both at 13. I just think, I think the Packers are too good. I think the Browns probably look better, and they still lose by 11.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you have it. We'll see what happens. That's it for me, buddy.
Yeah, that's it for me too, Chud. I appreciate it as always. And then after Green Bay, then it's Detroit, and then it's London. So we got a bunch of stuff coming up. So, all right, appreciate it, Chud. As always, I appreciate everybody listening. This has been another episode of the Zone Coverage Podcast, and you can read all my work at brownzone.com. Thanks.